Yesterday we had an intellectual discourse on various developmental issues in India, the sectoral concerns, the developmental experience of Kerala, agreements and disagreements, and we had a very vibrant researcher session with an array of new topics. Today we are going to deal with the political economy questions and the inclusiveness of development. And we'll also have a panel discussion in the afternoon session. So let us begin the technical session 4 on the topic political economy questions. I would like to welcome Professor Cyriac Mathews, Honorable Chair of this session, to the dais. I would also like to welcome Dr. Vinoj, Dr. Santosh, Verma and Ranjana Roy, and Dr. V. Nagarajan Naidu to the dais, who are the presenters of the session. Dr. A. Abdul Salim sir, who is the main speaker of the session, who is the all-in-all of ICRIER, to the dais. For the welcome address, may I invite Suyana.
Political economy questions. On behalf of IUCA and Department of Economics, I honorably welcome Professor Cyriac Mathews, Fellow, Institute of Sustainable Development and Governance, to the section. I also welcome Professor Abdul Salim A, the speaker of the section. He itself is the concept, the idea of this concept and this conference is derived from. It's conceptually and bloomed out from his mind, and he itself is the main idea or the main brain behind this conference. I heartily welcome you to sir. I also welcome the presenters of the section, Dr. Vinoj, Associate Professor, CDS, Trivandrum, and Dr. Santosh, Verma and Ranjana Roy, Dr. Nagarajan Naidu, Head Department of Economics, University College, Trivandrum. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. We are going to have a very interesting session, a very important session, actually. As the followers of the discipline of economics, it is our academic obligation to think on political economy, which is seldom taken up in classrooms, which is seldom discussed elsewhere. And that is precisely because of the ever-increasing influx of the principles of neoclassical economics, which govern policy formulation in India and elsewhere. Neoclassical economics, to my mind, originated towards 1875 with MacLeod writing on the definition of economics. He didn't bring out a precise definition of economics, but he said that economics is all about exchangeable values and the interrelations between them. He was successful in carrying forward that idea to Jevons, the Austrian school, and Alfred Marshall also. This continued to have its control over academics for quite a long time, although the concept of political economy was there in the air, belonging to physiocrats and the classicists. To MacLeod and Jevons especially, wanted to purify economics. I forget the name of the author, Carrie Black, I think that is the name of the author, speaks about Jevons and his effort to purify economics. Jevons and his disciples wanted to purify the social science of economics, to instill in economics the mathematical rigor, or rather the analytical rigor of physics. And they were successful at that. Even at the policy formulation level, neoclassical economics is mathematically very elegant. It has clear-cut values, because all exchangeable values are quantitatively measurable. But political economy is something different. It bothers to probe into or probe beneath the close to veil of exchangeable values. It upholds the idea that economics is a social science, and taking the cue from anthropological paradigms that man is a social animal, they uphold the contention that exchangeable values cannot be abstracted from the political, social, cultural, and ethical aspects of everyday life. So much so that any economic policy decision has to be related to all the interrelated aspects of human living. This is precisely how studying political economy becomes very important. We are not just quantitative economists, although quantification is a beautiful tool of economic analysis. Economics is not quantitative measurement, it is all about man in the ordinary business of life. So this discussion is very important, and I hope that this will pave the way for further discussions in political economy. We have on the panel Dr. V. Nagarajan Naidu, Head of the Department of Economics, University College Trivandrum, Dr. Vinoj Abraham, Associate Professor, Center for Development Studies, and Sri Santosh Verma of the Council for Social Development, New Delhi. And the keynote address will be delivered by Professor Abdul Salim, who is known to everybody. He is on the faculty of the Department of Economics, University of Kerala, Karivattam. I now invite Professor Abdul Salim to deliver the keynote address. Over to Salim.
Professor Cyriac Mathews, my close friend Dr. Nagarajan Naidu, Vinoj and Santosh Verma, my colleagues, dear research scholars and students. In fact, for this session, the keynote address has to be delivered by Venkatesh Atreya. Due to his wife's illness, he is not in a position to turn up. So I am forced to give you some idea on this particular political economy question on education in India. So I request you to bear with me. Okay, we are going to have a detailed discussion of the political economy questions on different aspects. This is on education, and the title of presentation is Higher Education and Inclusive Growth in a Developing Economy like India. See, as all of you know, there is a relationship between education and economic development. And you know that the relationship is mutually reinforcing. Realizing this importance of the mutually reinforcing relationship between education and economic development, people and governments all over the world began heavily investing in education, particularly higher education. But you are aware, with the world economic crisis, in the name of financial crisis, so to say, in the name of financial crisis, countries including India started gradually withdrawing from the field of education, particularly higher education. As you are aware, this has serious adverse effects on education and human development, education and socio-economic development in general. It has serious adverse effects on access and equity of various socio-economic groups in higher education. You are familiar with various figures in education and also in higher education. For example, you consider the gross enrollment ratio of higher education. What is this gross enrollment ratio of higher education? See, the number of children in the age group 18 to 23 who are able to enroll in higher educational institutions out of the total number of children in that particular age group. That is GER. Now, as per the statistics available in for the year 2030, this GER is 19.4%. Out of every 100 children in that particular age group, the most important age group in India, only 19 children are able to study in higher education institutions. And you know this figure in India, this India's figure is lowest as compared to the world average. Is lower than the world average. The world average is 30%. The world average, the world GR is 30%. And this India's average is lowest among the BRICS countries. You know BRICS countries. Again, 3 times lower than that of the developed nations. And you know now you know the kind of exclusion taking place in the field of education. Now, you try to decompose this DER between various socio-economic groups, between rural, urban areas, gender, etc. You can find that there exist large interstate variations. Rural-urban divide is immense. Gender disparities continue to exist in respect of girls from rural areas more severely. And again, poor non-poor divide, it is predominant in our country. And the latest statistics given by UGC reveal that nearly 80% of the beneficiaries of university education in India belong to whom? Belong to the top 30% of the income and occupation groups. Okay? You know the importance of this particular figure, this percentage. And again in 2012, as per the statistics given by the government of India, top 20% consumption expenditure classes cornered more than 50% of the number of seats in private institutions. The bottom 20% got only 4% of the seats. Generally, these elite parents of these children concentrate in urban areas, send their children to elitist institutions for medicine, engineering and management. You know the representation of various socio-economic groups in IITs, IIMs, ISETs, etc. Think of this. Only a few government-aided colleges are accessible to low-income groups. That is the kind of inequality, disparity in higher education. Now disaggregate the figures, disaggregate the GER between various socio-economic, between various social groups like SCSTs, OBCs, Muslims, etc. We find that there exists staggering difference in enrollment among different social groups. And the enrollment is very low for SCST and OBC. And the figures are there showing these in various higher education institutions. And the population percentages are also there. SCST, for SCST students, even after the mandatory reservations, the representation out of every 100 children in higher education institutions is only 15.5, and the population representation is 25.2% in the country. So in spite of the mandatory reservation, this is the percentage. The percentages, other percentages are there. For OBC, the representation in higher education institutions is 27.6, but their percentage in the population is 41%. Again, for Muslims in institutions, 3.8%. Their representation in the total population is 13.4%. So you can these figures are telling figures you can think of, and in many aspects we come to know that SCST and OBCs are untouchables in many of the centers of excellence, either as faculty members or students. Even the statutorily reserved positions are not filled in many of the so-called elite institutions in the country. Statistics show that 40% academic positions remain vacant in central universities, IITs, IIMs. 40% positions remain vacant. Thus, what is the conclusion that we can infer from this? We can easily infer that higher education in India is still a status stabilizer, not an invader of status rigidities. It is still working as a status stabilizer, not an invader of status rigidities. So we have several policies of attaining access to education, improving equality, etc. But we find that the policy of equal access is more rhetoric than reality for unequal groups. Now come to reforms and the role of educational exclusion due to the reforms. See, inclusive growth by reducing these disparities requires increased allocation of government funds, no doubt about it, as has been done in the case of Asian miracle countries. In the Asian miracle countries, what is going on? All these countries concentrate on providing, there is a wide provision for education and healthcare by government, and they concentrate on create both physical capital and human capital, and this has been done simultaneously. Creation of both human capital and physical capital has been done simultaneously. In our state, we are concentrating on creating physical capital and gradually withdrawing from the human capital front. That is the dilemma that India has been facing, the policy dilemma the India has been facing. The policy is a visionless policy in this particular aspect. So, if you compare the case of the Asian miracle countries and even the Western countries like USA, UK, etc., where higher education is the most protected sector even in these countries. So, Indian experience is contrary. So, here what is happening in India, reform measures have called for reduction in higher education subsidies. They have called for reduction in higher education subsidies and the realization of a larger share of cost from the students. This has been happening in the name of financial crunch. But you know how we can tap resources for the social sector. There are lots of possibilities of tapping resources. The problem is the problem of vision. So this kind of a withdrawal would lead to the exclusion of children from low socioeconomic groups. Already they are heavily excluded. They are seriously excluded. And this situation, this reform leads to further deterioration in the front. So in a society we know intelligence is evenly distributed among all the children in the society. Intelligence is evenly distributed. We can never argue that poor have no intelligence, only elite have intelligence. Intelligence is evenly distributed. So for comprehensive growth, what is needed? Tapping of the human intelligence belonging to all sections of the society. So that is what is required. So remember that poor also have potential intelligence and the talent for making signal contribution to societal development. They are excluded. Then how comprehensive development is possible? Nothing is possible with respect to comprehensive development. Statistics of government expenditure further reveal that budget allocation for education as a whole in 2016-17, the latest budget allocation for education. You observe the figures. The latest budget allocation for various sectors in the economy, and for education, it is only 3.6% of the total. Out of every 100 rupee, how much is allocated for education? Only 3.64 rupee is allocated for education. For higher education, it is only 1.45% of the total. So very poor allocation. Further, you disaggregate the figures with the help of the GDP. Education expenditure as percent of GDP is below 3% in India. And remember that this is the lowest among all the BRIC countries. This is one of the lowest figures among all the middle income countries, and India is considered as a middle income country at present. It is this percentage of educational expenditure to GDP in India is very low and lowest among BRIC countries. And you know the world average. World average is 4.9%, and we are allocating less than 3%. World average is 4.9%. Okay. So further you consider the figure of social service expenditure. Social service expenditure as percent to total government expenditure during the period 2008-9 to 2014-15. It shows that there is a decline from 24% to 22%. 2% decline is not a small decline. It's a heavy decline during this period. But think of the defense budget. Defense budget always remains at 23%. Even for this year, defense budget 23%, social service expenditure 22%. So again coming to, I have some a few words about defense budget also. See, we are simply adding layers and layers of personnel and equipment to the military, but poor intelligence network. The problem is intelligence networking. We have to allocate more money for this rather than adding more and more personnel and equipments for this. And you have to sophisticate what equipments are there. That attempt has not been done in the case of India. We are simply adding more and more. And you know the kind of equipment we are importing. Most of the equipments are second-hand equipments already used by the developed countries, etc. I am not going into the questions. I am not going into the details of this. You analyze. So what does it infer? It infers that the country prefers more guns than butter. That is the clear indication of the kind of priority that we are giving. Again, expenditure cuts and privatization. See, decline in this government expenditure no doubt leads to growing privatization. No alternative for this. If the government expenditure has been coming down, you have to have more provisions for privatization. But for a country like India with a serious poverty problem, with a serious inequality problem, inequality has been increasing right from 1990s, severely increasing right from 1990s. This kind of a privatization is highly dangerous due to lack of resources. They say that we have lack of resources, irrespective of the color of the government. All say that we have lack of resources, but I say it is a false claim. This is due to the inability and the willingness of the various governments to tap resources. We have to tap resources. Being a democratic government, welfare is the major concern of the government. It should be the major concern. So we are withdrawing from that concern. So the argument is lack of resources. So due to lack of resources, what is going on? Even vulgar forms of privatization get governmental and societal approval. It leads to dual system of higher education, one for the haves and the other for the have-nots. So Vijay Mallya and other people can easily invest black money in the field of higher education, and the statistics show that even in 2013, capitation fee for management quota seats comes to rupees 5,950 crores in India. This much money is generated out of capitation fee. Who can pay this? Only the rich people can pay this. So, what happens to corporatization? Government is withdrawing from the field of higher education. Everything is going to be left to the private agencies, and they consider this as a great profit-making venture. So, even corporates increasingly come here and invest. And even Adani and other groups, everybody can invest a huge amount of money, get capitation fees, profits like this. And you know the case of our bank loans, non-performing assets. Even recently, Vijay Mallya has flown with 9,000 crores of rupees. Okay, now this year's educational allocation, higher education allocation is all a very small 24,000 crores. So this is the case. For the private sector, generally there is a danger in the private sector. Private sector generally does not invest in non-market oriented long-term courses. They always invest in short-term courses, market-oriented courses. So social science streams always suffer. Our R&D suffers. For the last several years, R&D investment has been coming down. That's why, you know, the share of India in number of patents in the world, only less than 7%. So that is the kind of attention that we are going to give to R&D, only less than 7%. So even Sen argues in this way. See, Sen says that India is the only country in the world. India is the only country in the world trying for universal education through private sector. And argues. Now come to the case of higher education and GATS. You know GATS. See, under the new GATS regime, what happens? Higher education is treated as a tradable commodity. It becomes a tradable commodity under GATS regime. No concessions should be given on the basis of social justice. The government can then, what is the conclusion? In that stage, the government cannot continue to subsidize its own institutions. So whatever subsidies are there, it has to be cut short and controlled. So government is not in a position under the new GATS regime. The government is not in a position to subsidize even its own institutions. It cannot support new students through scholarships or reservation policies, etc. under the new GATS regime, and we have to abide by this from 2018 onwards. Recently, our Cyriac has gone there and put signature on this particular document. So we have to abide by it. These should be then, if government continue to subsidize this and continue to give more and more scholarships, these should be treated as unfair trade practices under the new GATS. Then these should be treated as unfair trade practices. That is the danger. Thus, you know, the hard-won policies of equity and constitutional guarantees in education would be reduced to mere rhetoric even in our country, the most democratic country in the world. So that is the situation. Now, there is a problem with our existing subsidization policy. That also we have to understand. There is a great problem, great fault with our existing subsidization policy, I say. In India, what happens? In India, higher education, mainly professional and technical education, in IITs, IIMs, ICERs, AIMS, etc., the so-called elite institutions. Even in these institutions, higher education has been provided at prices much below its costs. And who gets this subsidy? This is the subsidy. Higher education is provided at very, very small prices to the students. suppose the cost per student is rupees 5 lakh per year, only 2,500 rupees taken from that student, then we say that higher education is heavily subsidized. So, in these institutions, IIMs, ICIRs, IITs, etc. Now, who gets this subsidy? You know the representation of various socio-economic groups in these institutions. Who gets this subsidy? This subsidy is available to all students, irrespective of their capacity to pay. So we have to consider the capacity to pay of the students. For the rich, subsidy is non-essential. For the poor, it is inadequate. Now, you know, scholarships and fee concessions, they are given to the poor students. And generally given, it is given like that. And these scholarships are not sufficient many of the times even to cover the direct academic cost. 10% of the best educated students, 10% of the elite students in India received 61% of the resources of higher education. And this figure for the whole Asia is 36%. So, the students in IITs, IIMs, etc., out of every 100 children, see 61% children, out of every 100 children, most of the benefits are going to most of the resources are going to these 10% elite institutions. So 10% of the best educated students received 61% of the resources for higher education. Then the benefit of subsidy largely goes to the privileged, no doubt about it. Then the question is, most of the costs of higher education is being subsidized out of the tax resources extracted from the poor, who form the majority in India. So the elite are educated by the poor in India. That is my argument. The elite are educated by the poor in India because of this. Okay. So there is a negative transfer of resources. There is a negative transfer of resources from the poor to the rich. So the question of equity is most important again. The situation further deteriorates. So I am concluding. The rest of the things we will discuss last. We can come to the conclusion that there exists severe inequality in access to higher education in India. Inclusive growth by reducing these disparities requires increased allocation of government funds, as has been done in the case of most of the developed countries, as has been doing in the case of the tiger countries. Okay, but the government allocation and the measures are piecemeal, and this is even not sufficient to solve the phenomenal problem of access and equity of higher education in India. Consider the latest round of NSS survey. The survey shows that inequalities in higher education have increased. These are the words from the survey report. The NSS, the latest round says that inequalities in higher education have increased, and the absolute numbers of those attaining higher education in the bottom income groups have come down in the last decade. Now, in this situation, the government wants to have inclusive growth in higher education with enhanced role of private sector. In this situation, government wants to have inclusive growth with enhanced role of the private sector in inverted comma. Then the argument is that in this situation, no doubt, inclusive growth cannot be realized with a strategy of privatization. You might have read the 12th plan document. Now the planning commission is there, but it is there in some other name and with some more other things. Okay, anyway, consider that planning commission document. Documents were there even before. 11th plan document also says about inclusive growth. 12th plan document also says about inclusive growth. So 12th plan central principle that it says in the 12th plan. The 12th plan central principle that no student, no student who is eligible to be admitted should be deprived of higher education for financial reasons. This is the central principle in the 12th 5-year plan document. But you can think how it is possible. It is going to remain a mere rhetoric than reality. Not at all. It cannot be realized at all. So that is the situation that we are going to face in India. Thank you for the patient listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Salim, for that brilliant intellectual excursion to the quantitative and qualitative side of development in education. He was focusing on the positive resources that is being pumped into the education sector, and he would bring out a case to enlighten us on the point that there is a qualitative malady. Development is not reaching uniformly, and he was focusing on the idea that public policy should not assume the role of a retainer of status quo, rather it should be an invader of injustice. Thank you, Professor Salim, once again. We now proceed to listen to the panelists. We have a time constraint which is there in every seminar. I find it very unfair to chalk scholarly voices, but organizers may demand it because there are sessions to follow. So I think we will agree upon a certain time budgeting, 15 minutes. I think that should be okay with everybody. Try to limit our presentation to 15 minutes so that we will be getting adequate time for interaction. I now invite Dr. V. Nagarajan Naidu, Head of the Department of Economics, University College, Trivandrum, to present the paper on political economy of public debt in Kerala.
Chairperson and my teacher, Professor Mathews sir, and other dignitaries, before entering into my business, let me first of all express my heartfelt thanks to the organizers, particularly my close friend, Dr. Salim, the director of the center, for inviting me and stand before you. So the presentation of my paper, that is political economy of public debt and sustainability in Kerala. By presenting this paper, I'd like to pose a few questions in the arena of public policy. That is there any relationship between the way by which the government intervention for resolving various vexing issues and the political ideology of those in power? Also, whether the process of resource mobilization and expenditure pattern of the state changes in tandem with the transfer of power from one government to another. Are there any differences in fiscal management of government having differences in political ideology, and also the role of fiscal prudence in managing public debt? Among various fiscal aspects, one important area of management, fiscal management, is in the area of fiscal deficit, particularly and as consequent of public debt and its sustainability. So here, public debt means nothing but they defined as the CNAG is only interest-bearing liabilities on the part of government. So as you all we know that the management of public debt as well as the sustainability greatly depends upon the existing fiscal position of the concerned state government as well as government policies on resource mobilization as well as expenditure pattern. So in my presentation, first I give you some brief broad profile on the existing fiscal profile of the state government, and then later I come to the sustainability of our debt position and what are the major problems we are facing at present in our state. So, and also by showing this fiscal profile, you also get some idea about what are the reasons or factors behind increasing the various debts and also the consequent deficit as well as consequent increasing debt. So here what I have done is that actually here I am presenting the fiscal profile in the form of the growth rate of certain fiscal parameters, which consists of various revenue parameters, expenditure parameters, deficit parameters, etc. So I have estimated three kinds of growth rate. One is the long-term growth rate. Yeah, long-term growth rate is actually the average growth rate for the last 10 years. Then medium-term growth rate, that is the growth rate for the last 5 years, and finally the short-term growth rate, that is growth rate for the last 3 years. So as you all know that one of the important factors which lead to fiscal deficit and also deficit is increase in expenditure. So when you look at the rate of growth of expenditure, the rate of growth of expenditure is very high during medium term and short term compared to long term. And also within the expenditure, you know that there are two categories. One is the revenue expenditure and other one is capital expenditure. The rate of growth of revenue expenditure is very high That too in the medium term and short term. As we all know that the important component of revenue expenditure are mainly salary, pension payment and interest payment. At the same time, when you look at the rate of the capital expenditure, it is very low in the recent years. That is, when you look at the short term, we have a negative growth rate. Really, it is a signal warning because our productive capacity of the economy depends upon the our expenditure on capital goods. And also in the case of plan expenditure and non-plan expenditure, the rate of growth of plan expenditure is very low as compared to the non-plan expenditure. And so the one important trend is that there's a growing rate of growth expenditure, particularly during the short-term period, short-term and medium term. And along with that, there's an increasing or widening gap between expenditure growth rate and revenue received growth rate. So this widening gap or the disparity or the wedge between these two, that is revenue received and expenditure received, have grown more during short period and medium term than the long period. So this wedge between short revenue receipts and the expenditure receipts finally led to various types of deficit in our economy, including the revenue deficit, fiscal deficit, primary deficit, etc. So there are various ways by which we can meet our deficit. One of the important means by which state government meets their deficit is in the form of borrowings. That is nothing but public debt. So this table shows the deficit scenario in Kerala, that is actual position, that is in all respects, that is in the case of revenue deficit, fiscal deficit or primary deficit and our total deficit, there is an increasing trend in our state. And this figure, here I have shown the ratio between revenue deficit and fiscal deficit. So this provides one important indication, because here when you look at, though there is a decline in the ratio between revenue deficit and fiscal deficit, it is very significant. So wanted to show that now the share of revenue deficit to fiscal deficit comes around 65%, implies that out of our total fiscal deficit, 65% of fund is now being used for meeting our deficit created in the revenue side, mainly for meeting additional commitment in the field of salary, pension, interest payments. That means the amount available for capital expenditure is very, very less, and the studies show that out of our total fiscal deficit, we are able to use only 25% for our capital expenditure. So normally we relate various deficit as well as debt with GSDP, that is gross state domestic product. So in terms of gross state domestic product also, all this deficit as well as our debt GSDP are increasing. We have an increasing trend. I am not going to explain that trend. And again, the position of Kerala is not comfortable as compared at the all India level and also also compared with the southern states. See, our fiscal deficit as well as revenue deficit as well as our total liability in per capita term are very high. In per capita terms, they are very high compared to all India. Our total liability or debt, per capita debt in Kerala is now comes more than 30,000 rupees in Kerala, which is very high compared to any other states in India. And even compared to other southern states, our debt GST ratio is very high. See, here I have shown the debt position of the southern states like Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, etc. See, when you compare this, our debt position is very, very high. So now I have here classified or evaluated the various components of fiscal deficit. When you look at the various components of fiscal deficit, we get some idea about the way by which our fiscal deficits are utilized. So this is the various components of fiscal deficit in Kerala. So one inference shows that a major share of fiscal deficit is utilized for meeting our revenue deficit. Already I have explained that. The amount of fiscal deficit used for capital outlay or capital expenditure influence our growth prospect in future is only around 25%. And also, policymakers are also trying to decompose fiscal deficit on the basis of sources of origin. See, we identify two sources of fiscal deficit. One important source of fiscal deficit is due to growth of output or due to growth of GSDP. And another important source of growth of fiscal deficit is changes in the behavior of government in the fiscal field. Here I have used a model developed by Devendra Dholake of IIM Ahmedabad. On that basis, I have evaluated, based on the evaluator, what are the sources of this fiscal deficit in Kerala. What I found that in Kerala, the growth of deficit and consequent growth of debt is mainly due to changing government behavior. Because our debt is not in response to the growth prospect of our state. It is mainly because of the, I can be random or ignore, it is mainly because of the changing behavior of government in our state. That means the control and regulation of government behavior can, to a great extent, avoid the deterioration of fiscal deficit along with the augmenting economic growth in the state. So, in general, we relate the debt to GST, but you know that debt to the nominal GST, but the nominal GST has lot of limitation because the nominal value nominal GST depends upon the valuation method, the inflation factor, etc. And also it never represents the revenue generating capacity of the state government. So along with the GST, now people are using the revenue receipt of the state and also the state's own revenue receipts for evaluating the debt position, etc. I also with respect to our revenue receipts, our debt position in 2013-14 is 242%, whereas the ratio of debt to state's own revenue receipt is around 316%. As per RBI report, suppose a state's debt position exceeds 300% of its state's own revenue receipt, means that state is under debt stress situation. That means now a state is in a position, state is confronted in a debt stress situation. It is a very alarming situation, Then, as you all know that, what are the fiscal implications of growing debt? One of the important fiscal implication of growing debt is our interest payment. Out of our revenue receipts, 28% of our revenue receipt is now earmarked for interest payment every year. It is not a small amount. So, when you look at the structure of public debt in India, we have mainly two sources of public debt. One is two sources of total liability. One is public debt, that's mainly the internal debt or the market borrowing. The other one is public account, which mainly includes small savings and product fund. Whereas the loans and shares of central government is very small. Earlier, say in 2005, the share of loans and advances to central government comes around 12% or 13%, but when it comes to 2014, the share of central government has declined. It is only 7%. A major share of borrowing is from market borrowings. Then comes the public account, mainly small savings and product fund. So I come to a next important aspect of this discussion, that is whether our debt is stable or sustainable. So normally sustainability and stability we may use interchangeably, but these two terms are not same. Sustainability implies the capacity to pay back the debt servicing obligation and principal payment. Whereas when a state has reached a sustainable level of debt, the debt level having reached a stable proportion of certain indicators of economic capacity of the state, like the GSDP, revenue receipts, etc. So when a state reaches a sustainable level of debt, means that the debt will be more stable. As per our Fiscal Responsibility Act, the sustainable or the stable debt is related to our targeted fiscal deficit as well as the rate of growth of the economy. And they suggest that state government should reduce their fiscal deficit to 3%. If we are keeping that as our target, then we can estimate what will be the stable debt position of Kerala to GSDP, or are also sustainable. So I estimated the sustainable debt GSDP ratio for Kerala. When you compare with the actual debt GSDP ratio, you can see that our actual debt GSDP ratio is always greater than sustainable debt GSDP ratio. Our sustainable debt ratio is far less than actual debt GSDP ratio. Then, of course, then in addition to that, there are a large number of debt sustainability measures are available. On that basis, we can evaluate whether our debt position is sustainable or not. One important indicator used in our public finance is Domer gap. What's Domer gap? Domer gap is also known as rate spread. That is the difference between the rate of growth of national income in the case of state loan is a difference between rate of growth of GSDP and the average interest rate. In the context of Kerala, though we have a positive Domer gap, that is declining. Domer gap is declining. That is not a welcome trend. Then another indicator that it is assumed that our primary deficit should be confined to a share of a proportion of our existing debt liability. What is the proportion? The proportion is equal to the Domer gap or rate spread. So the amount of that debt liability as a proportion of the Domer gap is also known as quantum spread. So we assume that for a sustainable level of debt, our primary deficit must be equal to this quantum spread. But in the context of Kerala, our primary deficit is greater than quantum spread, and this difference is increasing. So that means in the context of Kerala in recent years, that debt stability has a negative trend, and it is a symptom for debt unsustainability of the state. And another important sustainability indicator is sufficiency of non-debt receipts. The debt sustainability could be significantly facilitated if the incremental non-debt receipts could meet the incremental interest burden and incremental primary expenditure. So there's a difference. This difference between incremental total expenditure and non-debt receipt is known as resource gap. In the context of Kerala, we have a negative resource gap, and also the negative resource gap also increasing. Okay, this is also not a welcome trend. And another important fact is the net availability of funds. The net availability of funds means the mobilized fund available after meeting the repayment of interest and principal amount. In the case of Kerala, when you look at the various reports of AG, we get the idea that out of net available fund for additional productive and other purposes, we have only 25%. Only 25% available. Then the burden of interest payment. As already mentioned that our average interest rate, interest payment out of our revenue receipt now comes around 20%. It's a very significant amount, and this payment of principal amount actually reduce our fund for other productive purposes. The investment and return. There's another important indicator. A certain portion of borrowed fund by the government is invested in public sector undertakings. But when you look at the rate of return from government investment from the borrowed fund, it is just only 1.6%. Because government borrow fund from the market at a rate of 7.2%, but when government invested in public sector undertakings, its average rate of return as per the AG is only 1.6%. That means there is no proper investment return analysis on the part of government spending. So this may affect our repayment capacity or scale in future. Then again, out of the borrowed fund, government refinances borrowed funds for various public sector undertakings. And it again shows that the average interest rate received by the government for its refinance is only 0.2%, while the average interest rate on government borrowing is 7.2%. Again, there is a difference. This situation is also adversely affecting the repayment capacity of the state. Again, another important aspect is quality of deficit or surplus. That is the way by which the borrowed fund use significantly affect the carrying capacity of the economy as well as repayment capacity of the state. So again, the share of capital expenditure in primary expenditure is a good indicator of the amount of borrowed fund utilized for enhancing productive capacity in the economy. It is also very low. The share of capital expenditure to primary expenditure is small, which adversely affect the economy in future. So again, so many other indices are also there. That means, except a few indicators, except in the case of the rate of growth of interest to revenue receipt or the total expenditure, in all other indices, our debt is not at all sustainable. Debt is not at all sustainable. The question is that, if debt is not sustainable means, we have to see our scarce resources. We mobilize from various sources of revenue receipts as well as borrowing should be used for our debt service obligation as well as repayment of principal amount. So we won't get sufficient fund for our economic activities. So it's a very dangerous situation. Then what is the solution available? Or there are large number of steps we can adopt for enhancing the sustainability of public debt in Kerala. Among these, what I suggest only one point that, see, we have to augment the rate of growth of our economy. The most of our problem lies with the low growth rate of the economy. We have to enhance our growth of our economy, and for enhancing the growth rate of the economy, we have to adopt a multi-pronged strategy. We should cover the expenditure side, revenue side, and also debt management side. I can suggest a large number of suggestions, but I am confining only a few suggestions, and I am not going to explain those suggestions, but I just give you certain indications. On the expenditure side, more expenditure should be allocated or diverted for productive sector activities. Then again, now our plan expenditure is declining in recent years. So we have to enhance plan expenditure and reduce unproductive revenue expenditure. You have to reduce unproductive. Now, if you are looking at the rate of growth of expenditure, major share of expenditure growth is in the case of revenue expenditure, not the capital expenditure or the plan expenditure. And subsidy must be targeted. Suppose if you are able to target our subsidy, we can save money, and that saved money can be diverted for productive purposes. And also, we have to increase the capital outlay for accelerating growth in future. And also, now we are introducing large number of welfare schemes, but these welfare schemes are not integrated. We have to, by integrating welfare scheme, we can enhance the efficiency of these schemes, and also we can reduce wastage of resources. And also, we have to improve another important aspect in the expenditure side is that we have to not only rationalize allocation, but also enhance the efficiency of expenditure. That is, improve the efficiency of expenditure by avoiding congested spending of planned funds during the last quarter of the financial year. Now we are spending major share of our planned expenditure either in the last month of the financial year or the last quarter of the financial year. That definitely affect the efficiency of our expenditure. And also, see, we are wasting lot of resources from our central government. See, we have to timely utilize the centrally sponsored schemes. Then in the case of revenue side, compared to other states in India, we have a lot of tax evasion, tax avoidance. Only through better tax administration, that is, we have to implement e-governance in all fields of tax administration. Like that, we can avoid tax evasion as well as tax avoidance. And also, in the context of non-tax revenue, we are not utilizing potential level. In other, see, our share of non-tax revenues comes around only 10%. It is much far less than the share in the all India level. So we have to increase the potential of we have to increase the non-tax potential, and also for that we have to make a periodical revision of tax or non-tax rates of non-tax revenue sources. In the case of one moment. In the case of debt management, in Kerala, there are various strategies we have with respect to NRI deposits. In Kerala, we have around 75,000 of crores of NRI deposit coming every year in Kerala, but we are not utilizing it properly. So I suggest that we have to improve we have to introduce some innovative instruments for utilizing these NRI deposits. And at present, our borrowing is not rational. Suppose if we take the quantum, the share of borrowings, our borrowing is not from the cheaper sources. That is why at present our borrowing is not rational. We have to make it more rational. And also, see, a percentage of the borrowed funds government at present utilized for sustaining the public sector undertakings. We have to restructure. Public sector undertaking must be restructured urgently to reduce our implicit subsidy. And there are various ways by which we can improve and we can restructure public sector undertakings. And another important suggestion is that there must be a floor limit for the net availability of borrowed funds to capital outlay. At present, there is no such a floor limit. Because, see, suppose we borrow some fund, there must be a limit that, I just don't fix that, okay, at least minimum 30% should go for the capital outlay. Such a limit is not at all prevailing at present, but we have to make such a series. And also, to make it our debt more sustainable, we have to at least, we have to maintain a situation that growth of primary debt must be at least equal to the quantum spread. Already, what is the quantum spread already I explained. These are some points I want to put forward to you. So with this, I stop my presentation here, and the remaining thing we can talk at the time of discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nagarajan Naidu, for making a dissection of the corpus of public debt in Kerala with the support of sharp statistics. The essential focus was that Kerala's debt position is far above the sustainable benchmark. And any kind of policy, public policy that deviates from sustainability will have dangerous implications ahead. So we expect responses from your side when the session is over on these issues. May I now invite Dr. Vinoj Abraham, Associate Professor, Center for Development Studies, to present his paper on declining share of wages in the organized manufacturing sector in India.
Good morning to all. Thank you very much, organizers of the University Center for Alternative Economics, Department of Economics, for inviting me to be here. It's a pleasure to be here, and especially thank Dr. Salim and Siddiq for inviting me here. This is again a slightly longish paper, but I'm going to summarize it right now so that if you have any problems towards if there is a time constraint, I don't have to, you will not miss out on what the arguments are. So basically what I'm trying to say is that what I'm going to do is to show wage shares in the organized manufacturing sector. It has been declining, and it's known to most people who are engaged in the field that the wage share has been declining. And then I try to argue that the decline in wage share is achieved mainly through enhancing the flexibility in the labor market. By flexibility, what I mean, we'll discuss that later on. But through various means of bringing in flexibility, it is possible to reduce the wage share in the organized manufacturing sector. And when I say you are reducing the organized manufacturing sector wage share, on the other side you have actually profits increasing. So when I'm saying that we are looking at decline in wage share, we are also answering the question, why is it there a sustained rise in the profit share? Now, those of you who had been reading the newspapers of recently, today who would have read the papers, you would have seen the Panama Papers. You would have seen about the Panama Papers and the huge amount of money that is left with the ultra rich, the ultra elite. I mean, how they park it is we don't know how they park their money from how do they park it, we do not know. But this paper, I think, also gives some indication as to where do they get this from. I mean, it does not give you answers on how do they park it or where they park the money, but it just gives some indication as to where this money comes from also. I think so. Some in terms of in the production sector, where this sources of money comes from also tries to. I've divided the papers in the given outline, but I'll be focusing mostly on three aspects. That is looking at trends in the factor payments, then accounting for the drop in wage share, and then looking at the flexibility patterns that are arising, and then looking at the determinants of declining wage share. Let me go directly to the sticky objectives, and I'm going to this directly. This is the pattern of factor shares that I was talking about. If you look at the organized manufacturing sector in India, which consists of, by definition, consists of only firms that has got more than 20 or workers with electricity, without electricity, or 20 or 10 workers with electricity, by going by the definition of Factors Act. If you look at the last of those, that is the blue one at the end, which is written as wages to workers, that's the one which shows the wage share in the organized manufacturing sector starting from the 1980s onwards, and you can see that this consistently has been declining. From 1980s to 2013, it has been gradually over the period of time, it has been declining continuously. Now, the red one just above that shows the other emoluments. Other emoluments consist of provident fund, bonus, gratuity, and other kinds of quasi-fixed payments that are made to workers. Now, if you look at that, that actually does not decline. The share does not decline much, but the total emoluments that goes to the workers declines, basically because the wages to the workers are declining, but the quasi-fixed payments are not declining, they are more or less stable. The line just above that, the green one, shows the rent that is paid in the gross value added. This is all in terms of the share in gross value added. Now, the rent paid also is a very small fraction, just about 1%, 1 to 2%, and it remains more or less constant from the 1980s to 2000. But the one that is just above that is the interest payments that are made. If you look at that, has got some very wild fluctuations. Starting from the 1980s to 2000, the interest payments largely was stable. Though it looks fluctuating, it's because of the other fluctuations below, but largely it was stable throughout the period from 1980 to 2000. And then we see a large dip in interest payments starting from the 2001 onwards, and it goes on to 2008-9. And then it is almost stagnant at the levels that is achieved at around 2005-6 onwards, almost stagnant. But the blue one again on top of that is the profits share. And now if you look at the profit share has been gently, gradually increasing from 1980 onwards till 2001. And from 2001 onwards, there is a quantum jump in the profit shares. And if you can see this, the other ones, the payments that are, there are a whole lot of other payments that does not become part of the gross value added payments that are made in terms of factor payments. That has been accounted as other payments. It includes also depreciation, because we have taken gross value added as the figure. It includes depreciation also. Now, what is interesting over here is that two or three important factors. That is, the wages has been continuously declined. The share of wages that is given to workers has been continuously declining, but the emoluments have not been declining. That is, the quasi-fixed payments has not been declining. That's one important trend. The other important trend to notice is that the profit shares have been increasing over a period of time. If you're starting from the 1900s, the profit shares have been continuously increasing, but the rate of increase of profit shares has increased drastically starting from from 2000 onwards. And the rate of increase in profit shares from 2000 onwards is not related to the declining trend in wage share. That's important to note that, but it is related to the declining trend in the interest payments. So the change in the wage share, the change in the profit shares that occurs after 2000 is mainly because of interest payment decline rather than a decline in the wage share. So wage share is declining, yes, but the decline in the recent past after 2000 is not caused by the rise in profits is not caused by wage share, rather it comes out of interest payments. Now, why this thing, we'll look into that later. Now, if you look at of the total gross value added, growth rates in gross value added, what share of the gross value added goes as emoluments, rent, interest, and profit? You look at over the period of starting from the 1980s to 2013, if you have just divided decade-wise, I've not done any breaks around this year, but just taking decade-wise, if you look at the rate at which the share of the growth of gross value added goes to the various factor payments, if you look at every decade, this share has been rising. 19.3 was the share of the total gross value added, of the total growth in gross value added that was going to profits in 80 to 90. From 90 to 2001, you said it increased to 20.8, and between 2001 and 12.3, hugely 49.3. That is about 50% of the total growth in the gross value added went as profit shares in the gross value added. At the same time, the wages component in the wage share component in the rise in gross value had been continuously declining. It's declined from 19% to 12% and 10%. So total change, roughly about 45% of the change in the gross value. The growth in the gross value added was accounted by profits, but only 10% was accounted by the wage share. Now, one of the questions that we end up answering, there are two interesting aspects to note here. One is the famous Caldorian long run growth facts. We've heard this thing in our economics. The long run growth fact says that the share of profits and share of wages are in the long run constant. They will not seem to be moving. At least the experience that came from the developed economies, the experience was that roughly about 60% of the total wage share of the total gross value added comes from wages, and roughly about 40% goes as profits. And the long run growth, one of the growth facts is that this is stable, and it's stable for it's been found stable for many at least in the first half of the 19th century, it was found to be stable for quite some time. And Keynes himself had addressed this thing, saying that this is a mystery that this is stable for such a long time, but it is mysteriously stable that the wage share and the profit share seems to be stable for a long time, starting from the early 1900s to 1950s onward, till the 1950s. Now, and it was during this time, the 1950s, we had this Cobb-Douglas production function, the typical neoclassical tool that came to be explaining what is the distribution between wage share and between the profit and wage share distribution, how does it distribute? And the Cobb-Douglas production function was estimated across countries, across various countries, industries, and almost all of these things ended up by saying that yes, it is stable, and the Cobb-Douglas production function, and in the end, just for a particular countries and just for a data, instead of testing whether the Cobb-Douglas production function gives the results rightly, even the Cobb-Douglas production function itself had become a reverse test. That is, if the data is correct, if you want to know whether the data is correct, you put the Cobb-Douglas production function and see whether it is stable or not. If it is not stable, then you say that the data that is available is wrong. So instead of arguing it, the causality, that I can reverse the causality in terms of what is. But all of this argument about the long run stability, the long run Caldor long growth facts, the Cobb-Douglas production function, the Keynesian understanding about all of this was hinged on one aspect, that is, under some conditions, that is under perfect competition, your wage rates would be equal to the productivity. That is and growth in productivity would be equivalent to wage rates. Now, if the wage rates are paid according to the productivity growth, or according to productivity, or the growth of wage rates is equivalent to the productivity growth, then you would see that this share, that is the share that labor would have, the share of capital would have, would be more or less equal, and it would be still stable in the long term. Now, it is in this context you should see what is happening to productivity growth and the wage share and the wage rate growth in India's organized manufacturing sector. The blue line over there shows the productivity growth in the organized manufacturing sector, and the red line over there shows the earnings per employee. You it includes both wages as well as emoluments. Now, as you can see, the productivity growth has been growing, it is galloping up high enough, and it's been going at least till 99, 2000, there has been some stable growth, and then it just jumps up, it gallops up at a very high rate. But if you look at the wage share and the wage rate that is growing, it is almost completely lying low. Earnings per labor has been lying low. The gap between labor productivity and earnings per employee has been widening, and there is no sign of this kind of closing down. Every year after year, this gap seems to be widening in the organized manufacturing sector. Now, this is an extremely worrying factor, that productivity seems to be increasing, and it's a large rise in productivity within the organized manufacturing sector. But the returns, the share of wages, which should be somewhat equivalent to, at least if not equal, at least somewhat equivalent to productivity, should be seen by the workers. That does not seem to be coming, and that's extremely worrying factor in terms of how wages and profits are distributed, and this has got a lot of other implications in terms of consumption, in terms of power relations within the economy. All those things I'm not going to discuss. Now, two aspects to note is that this share in the total emoluments in total workers, it's possible that there are this differences in shares, this decline in share in wages. It's possible that there are 2-3 possibilities through which this occurs. One of the possibilities that we can think about is that, yes, share of wages is declining, but it is not declining across all states. There are some states which have got very large decline, but there are some states which have very large rise in wage share. So in the net, you should see it as a wage share decline. That's all that's what it is. But reality is also the theoretical background probably to argue this thing is that if the incentive system across different states are different, and industries start locating differently, and industries with different types of capital and labor intensity shifts across different states, then you have a possibility that some states with very large wage share, some states with very large capital intensive industries are moving to one state, some states, and states with some industries with labor intensity are moving to other states, and it is a possibility that this kind of thing. But we see that if you look at the data, we don't see any of these things. We said overall, starting from 1980 to 2012, across all the states, there has been a decline in the wage share. It is not a state-specific phenomenon. The only two states show some stability in this. That is, one is Haryana, the other is Kerala. Now, Kerala also had experienced some decline from 80 to 2000, but it's since 2000 onwards, you don't see the decline in the wage share in the case of Kerala. And Haryana, during 1990 to 2000 also, there was a decline, but otherwise it's been stable in Haryana. But across all other states, by some account, there has been some decline in the wage share. Profit share, on the other hand, you can see that almost all the states, except for Haryana, we see that the profit share had increased. So it is not a state-specific thing. That is, some states are having a declining profit, other states are having a declining, increasing profit. It's not a state-specific. Now, if you look at the correlation between the state's share of factor payments, I have done it for across 4 pages just to show that it is stable across payments, that the correlation is stable. If you look at, I have drawn correlations between emoluments to profit shares, emoluments to interest payments, emoluments to rent, profit to interest and profit payments. Now, profit to rent. Obviously, emoluments to profit will have a negative 2 minutes more. 2 minutes only, so let me just go through it a little bit faster. Emoluments to profit obviously has a negative relationship. That is, when emoluments are increasing, profit share will decline. So share of profits and share of emoluments we can understand. Emoluments is largely wages and other payments made to the workers. But the interesting thing to note here is that the emoluments and interest payments, there is a positive relationship between emoluments and interest payments. Now, how is it that wage share keeps increasing when interest payments increase, and wage share keeps declining when interest payments decline? Now, this is a question. I mean, in fact, what it's showing is a spurious correlation. The correlation is actually it's a negative correlation between profit and income. That is what it is. That is, when profits are increasing, interest payments seem to be declining. When interest payments are increasing, profits payments seem to be declining. In other words, this shows the contradiction between the rate of return to capital in productive purposes and rate of return to capital in speculative purposes. So this is actually a contradiction. Whenever there is rate of return higher in the productive purposes, investments need to be moving into this sector. Otherwise, there should be interest payments that is based on speculative investment. Probably that makes it more interesting. So let me just stop that. This is change in share of our emoluments across employment size. If you look at it, the large sized firms that we size the largest decline in wage share. It's not the smaller size firms. Large, these are the ones that are larger, and you can see the drop is much larger than the larger sized firms. If you look at it across industry wise, all the industries, except for one industry, all the industries will find this kind of decline in the wage share. So it's not an industry specificity, it's not a state specificity, it's not any of these things. So then we come back to the question about, let me skip all these things. I had done some shift share analysis, and it just shows that it's not industry specificity, it's not about states, it's not about industries, but it is about within industry. Within each industry there is some change that is going on, and that is what causing the shift in the wage share from, this shift in the wage share, that is the decline in the wage share. Now, so to answer this shift in the wage share, we have to answer what kind of composition of workforce within each industry needs to be analyzed. And I'm just directly going into the results of over here. The main things I want to say is that the share of male workers, direct male workers are declining in the organized manufacturing sector. Share of female direct workers in the total employment is declining, but if you look at as a share of females in direct workers, that is permanent workers, that is increasing, but among the total employees it is declining. Contract workers, I think this is the most important thing, that share of contract workers are largely rising, extremely large rise in share of contract workers. And managers in total employment, that is supervisors and managers, in the total employment it is declining, but if you compare it with direct workers, it has been increasing. The share of managers and Then another important aspect to look at is the number of days that are worked per worker per year. Now if you look at across period, whether you take male workers, female workers, contract workers, any of the kind of workers, the number of hours, number of days of work has increased consistently for all India as a whole. Days of work per male direct worker has increased from 306 days per year to 310. For females, it has been the largest increase from 299 days to 310 days. For contract workers, it has increased from 305 to 308 days. And for managers, it has increased from 303 to 360. And for days per worker, for overall it has been an increase from about 300 days to 307 days. Now, remember the earlier calculation which I had shown about labor productivity. The labor productivity was measured in terms of labor productivity per worker. Now, if you're converting that labor productivity per worker into labor productivity in hours, then actually we get a completely different picture. We may not get the picture that we are looking at. But the wage payments are done in terms of the hours, the day, in terms of, most of these are permanent workers, the wage payments are done on a monthly basis or on a yearly basis. So there is some kind of time boundness about that thing. But in terms of work, what is happening, that what I'm saying is that the contribution that is made by workers is much more than what is seen to be in the labor productivity measure. Now, let me go through this thing. Let me just go to the final results. There is a, I look at, what I do is to take 3-digit level industries across states and take a first difference model and just running a simple OLS model, but it's a first difference model, looking at wage share and employment share separately. And the results, I'll just show the results. The change in capital labor ratio has a negative effect on change in wage share. That is, as the capital intensity increases, wage share seems to be declining. Then increase in technology in terms of information technology capital used in the total capital. If that is increasing, just counted as IT capital as representative technology in capital. That seems to have a very important same wage share. Then rise in contract workers within the employment seems to have a very strong negative effect. Presence of women in direct employment again has a negative effect on the wage share. And non-wage employment per worker, that is quasi-fixed cost for the employer. A rise in this expense would encourage workers to substitute workers with hours of work, which would imply that the wage bill may not increase even if the hours of work will increase. Now, in conclusion, I will make the following remarks. 3 aspects within the workforce, that is contractualization of workers, feminization of workers, and substitution of workers with more days of work. these are the three aspects through which flexibility is brought into the labor market, and that seems to be having a strong role in kinds of declining wage share. There are two other factors also: increasing capital intensity, that has reduced the demand for labor, and changing composition of capital, that is capital becoming more and more technology intensive. That also seems to have a strong effect on the declining, in explaining the share of wages in the gross value. Let's stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Vinoj Abraham, for enlightening us on several issues in the labor market. The essential point was that labor productivity and earnings per worker continue to have a remarkable divergence over time. And this is something that has to be reckoned as part of the ongoing neoliberal regimes that are being practiced universally. Neoliberal power regimes permit the corporates to cut wages, but they call it by a virtuous name, and the name is austerity. Austerity measures happening everywhere. But austerity measures very often manifest themselves in wage cuts, lengthening of working hours, etc. We are reminded of what Marx said. Anyway, this is some area where powerful interactions can happen. We now proceed to listen to Professor Santosh Verma from the Council for Social Development, New Delhi. And he is presenting a paper co-authored by Ranjana Roy. They are from, Ranjana Roy is from ICRIER, New Delhi. The paper is on political economy of inequality in ownership holdings, the question of land reforms in major states of India. Over to Professor Santosh.
I'm associate fellow at CSD. So, and I also thank my friend Siddiq for his kind gesture to invite me here. And first of all, let me confess a few things that from my very early days of education, from 6th, 7th, 8th, till PhD and till date, whatever positive first or highest we used to, we can close our eyes and say Kerala. When we think over of human development, we used to count Norway, Sweden, and then we used to find Kerala somewhere in that list, not India. So someone yesterday, one of my friends said that you are going to God's land. So I said that no, because I am a non-believer, I said this is the progressive hard work of the people of this state, and always they are ready to change. That's why they are in this list. So let me start my presentation. This is the plan of presentation. What land reform, a myth. The land revenue policy of colonial regime sparked into mutiny of 1857 and threatened the newly established imperial rule in India. That was basically when Britishers started changing land policy in India. There was 1857 mutiny, and they stopped changing land relations in India. And for example, they established a commission on agriculture in 1928 to recommend for the improvement in agriculture for the promotion of welfare and prosperity of the rural population, but not to make recommendations regarding the existing land system and ownership and tenancy or assessment of land revenue in India. So the status quo also was added with the private ownership of land throughout the country, and before Britishers, somewhere we find that there was community holding of land, but what Britishers did, they promoted private ownership of land. Another thing was what colonial regime did was deindustrialization, which turned agriculture into human oppressor and simultaneously increased competition for land, where the trio of what we know landlords, money lenders, traders worked together to further fortify the colonial institutions and existing land structure. But as I said that the first mutiny in 1857 was due to the peasantry, and they also played decisive role in and raising several questions on the existing land relations in that period. After independence, the notion came the land reform, which was of three kinds. First, the Congress view based on Agrarian Reform Committee constituted in 1949, which recommended land reforms through the enactments within the framework of parliamentary democracy. Then second was the view developed under the leadership of Vinoj Bhave, a Gandhian leader who was inspired by Gandhian theory of trusteeship, who launched the Bhudan Gramdan movement. And third view was originated from political thesis of Communist Party of India, which asserted to break the monopoly of land inherited under the feudalism. The thesis put forward was land to the tiller. And after that, several committees were constituted, numerous legislations were drafted, passed, but the whole process of land reform was almost on the paper only. Very few states this land reform took place. First was Jammu and Kashmir due to some geopolitical reason and some the party, the National Conference and its leader Sheikh Abdullah also from the was supported by the peasant class, and the land reform took place there. And then West Bengal and Kerala due to stronger left movement and greater degree of awareness and organizational pressure from the peasant groups. And the third was the Telangana part of the then Andhra Pradesh due to lesser loopholes in the legislation. And in all other states, land reform either was on paper or just it was some change in emerging class of landholders. And the Planning Commission of its paper in 1973 said that the land reform was not successful because it was a weakness of political will. Now I come to my presentation. What I have done, this was all the literature. Now, given these backgrounds, this paper tries to pinpoint the present scenario of land distribution and persisting land ownership inequality among different classes, social categories, and various religious groups in the major states of India through explaining the 70th round of data, which is the latest round. The 70th round includes data on distribution of land holding, ownership and operational holding, tenancy and land use pattern, cropping pattern, and data on irrigation. But the structure of land ownership and its distribution in rural India, as described by various NSSO surveys, have been questioned time again on the basis of its accuracy, reliability of data estimation, and extent of landlessness. As we find that, as against several studies mentioned above claiming higher incidence of landlessness, the estimates of 70th round of the Land and Livestock Survey underestimates the extent of landlessness and reports that only 7.41% of the households are landless in rural India. So I am skipping the methodology part. Basically, I am coming to homestead as productive and unproductive use. I want to show that how they do in methodology. The official estimates of landlessness are as following. If the land holding with the household is less than 0.002 hectares, including land under homestead, in it, that is at every serial number from 1 to 98. In NSS data, they calculate land holdings from 1 to 98. And however, in our study, we have estimated landless households excluding 97 and 98, that is homestead land. So, if we count state-wise homestead land, which is for used for cultivation, and homestead land which is not being used for cultivation, though it provides a little support to most of the landless households, in their daily meal, like maintaining kitchen garden. It is noticeable fact that every major state of India per household average homestead land used for cultivation is lesser than the homestead land per household without cultivation. You can find that homestead land used for cultivation is lesser than the homestead land not being used for cultivation or productive work. Now you can see the landlessness in major Indian states. Second column is the official estimate, which is shown in the 70th round of data, landlessness, and the third column, which we have calculated as landless households. You can find the Kerala is 10.81 in official estimate, but we have calculated 56.51%. And for overall India, it is 7.41%, as I earlier said, and in our estimate it is 41.87%, the landlessness. Now I will show only one figure here because time is not there. You all will be using efficiently the Lorentz curve method. You can find that around 94% households have only 3.3% landholding in India. And if you go further, 97 or 98% have only around 11.1% landholding in India, and the rest 1.2 or 1.26% have around 88 or 89% land in India. You all will be using efficiently the Lorentz curve method. You can find that around 94% households have only 3.3% landholding in India. And if you go further, 97 or 98% have only around 11.1% landholding in India, and the rest 1.2 or 1.26% have around 88 or 89% land in India. Now, how can we tackle this, the landlessness in India? We have made some recommendations. Like we have first calculated what is the surplus land. If we fix the ceiling of 18.5 acres or 7.5 hectares per household, we have surplus of 23 million acres of land all over the India. And how can we distribute? To distribute further, if we can calculate it further. So what this distribution will do, the distribution of land in such a way, firstly will lessen acute land scarcity at the lower end, and it will necessarily be able to minimize several deprivations around among the most backward communities, especially in Dalits, minorities and other backward classes. So my concluding point is, land reform and its justifiable distribution to acute tillers remained a distant dream due to numerous loopholes in the legislation. This accentuated land concentration into few hands, and the masters of these lands carried on to enjoy the political power and to control the rural economic structure in almost all the states of India. And the calculation of landlessness by the NSSO is vague and inaccurate. There is surplus of 23 million acres of land in the major states of India, which can be redistributed to landless households, estimated a total of around 24.82 million households. There is urgent need to promote pooling of land for cooperative cultivation among smallholders to make it viable. And there is also a dire need of net macroeconomic policies which could protect these cultivators and cooperatives from different vagaries like natural calamities to several other market discrepancies. Thank you.
Mr. Santosh Verma for highlighting those varied aspects in land distribution. The point was that land reforms in India must be desired. It hasn't taken place in the way it should take place, resulting in accentuation of the miseries of people who are essentially landless. Now, we may declare that the floor is open for responses. Please do respond from your seat it would be nice if you can identify yourself before offering our responses, please.
Request the audience to be very brief to the point and to ask specifically. First give your name and then ask the question.
Thanks to Dr. Nagarajan Naidu. His paper was on how to make the fiscal deficit in control. So, you at some point of presentation, you made a remark that the Fiscal Responsibility Act of Government is it will be useful to control the deficit. But sir, is it not the fiscal deficit? The Fiscal Control Act, the Fiscal Responsibility Act of Government, the central government, is it not? It is not gripping the state governments or controlling the state governments to from devising their own policies, their own innovative policies to implement in the state. Is it that just blind economic growth can bring development? That's what we were discussing throughout the seminar presentations. And if the central government through such an act grip the state government to from implementing innovative policies, how can we conceptualize development in a state specific manner? So my second question is to Salim sir. Sir, it's a very simple logic. I'm not. It's not a very big question. You were saying about the privatization of education. So actually I'm against privatization of education, but the thing is that when privatization education comes into the state, when there are so many competitors, you said the education become a commodity. When so many providers, when so many producers give this commodity, then when the free competition happens, it tends to love the expense of the education. So it will wouldn't it make accessible the education to all the poor people?
Is to Dr. Nagarajan Naidu. In fact, there are a number of things that I agree with you, or on which I agree with you, but what is the basis of this 3% RPM target? Or, to me, it seems these are entirely arbitrary. 3% target for fiscal deficit, or some arbitrary target for debt to GDP or debt to GSDP ratio and so on. These have been proven to be entirely arbitrary. The only measure of sustainability of debt is that the rate of growth of debt should not exceed the rate of growth of income of the government. Other than that, these targets are entirely arbitrary and actually ideological, on the basis of a certain ideology which says that the government should not spend. And curtailing government spending, which will actually be detrimental to growth itself, overall economic growth, and as a result, the growth of government revenue itself. So that is what has been borne out by the experience of world countries, including Greece last year and so on. In fact, even this distinction between capital expenditure and revenue expenditure, Ziko Dasgupta's work in JNU has shown that even revenue expenditure need not be seen as such a big disaster, because revenue expenditure includes expenditures such as primary education and on other social sectors and so on. And even these can actually augment growth. So that is my comment regarding your presentation. Secondly, I have a question to Dr. Salim. He said that subsidies for the elite is non-essential. Probably true, but is the subsidies for the elite is non-essential? As a matter of fact, it might be true, but if the conclusion that should be derived from that is that there should be differential fee structure, in the sense of the rich should pay more, the children of the rich should pay more fee. Is that what you are saying? Yes. So if that is the case, then I have a comment to make. That essentially amounts to accepting that education is a commodity. Education is a commodity, and some people who can afford to pay for it should pay for it. So there is a problem with regard to that. The point then the natural corollary of that is that the products of that education will also be commodities. So those who have paid 50 lakh capitation fee to buy an MBBS seat, those doctors, the primary concern of those doctors will be to how they can recoup their expenses. So that will, they have to sell themselves in the market. So that amounts to vitiating the kind of practice that they will adopt in their professional career itself. Secondly, there is also this problem that your entire career, your entire life will be dependent on what your parents can afford. If your parents are, from the point of view of students, if your parents are paying for your education, that also means that it is generally seen, we have paid for your education, so you choose the career that we decide, you marry the person that we decide, and so on. So this thing, the demand for education as a right, as opposed to education as a commodity, is part of the demand for the democratization of society itself. So differential pay structure in that sense is entirely antithetical to these basic demands. And inequalities in society have to be directly addressed through wealth tax, through progressive taxation, direct taxation, through land reforms and so on. And the biggest subsidies in this country are given to the rich. 6 lakh crore rupees every year as tax concessions to the rich by the central government. That is the biggest subsidy. So targeting subsidy, we call the whatever money is given to the poor, we call them subsidies. Whatever subsidies that we are giving to the rich, we call incentives. So this should stop, I believe. Both Vinoj and Dr. Vinoj and Dr. Santosh have talked about inequalities. So I just have a request to Dr. Santosh. If you just, if you can just, alongside the table that you have produced with regard to the ownership holdings, so if you can just add the figures from the previous round, we could make a comparison. So because if you look at the previous round survey and comparing, just by quick look at figures, it seems that landlessness has increased.
Thank you. My question is to Dr. Salim sir. From yesterday's discussion, presentation by Dr. Prasad and Dr. Kabir, and your presentation, they are somehow linked on the issues of ST, SC, and OBCs. I have some confusion. How do you, because the presentation reflects caste system as a social class, but it also comes as if, from what you can read, it can easily be an economic class. It can easily lead to a political class. So, I think the initiative should be in a way, because if a social class turns into an economic class, and you can't separate politics from economics, then there are high chances that it turns out into a political class. And when it turns into a political class, the evidence to address the issues we are seeing somehow complicated. How do you see, how do you separate the three? Caste as a social class, how is it possible to, how is it linked to the economic class? Because from the presentation, they somehow intertwined in a way from my analysis, which is somehow strategically is an issue. Then the second question on the land reforms from Dr. Santosh talked about a series of land reform from 1857 to date and issues of agitation about surrounding it. Basically, when you read through land reforms, they're basically very good. But the claims are that the land did go to the tiller, it went to the tenants, and some are not. Why was something supposed to be for A, B for B? The intention of the whole process, why did it go contrary? What are the reasons behind it? Thank you.
Question is to Dr. Nagarajan. The pension seems to be one of the contributing factors to the debt scenario in Kerala. But did ever Government of Kerala compute a pension sustainability index? Because it's all about the sustainability of the debt. We have to also know about the sustainability of the sub-components of the debt. So, did ever, I mean, I just want to know whether there was any attempt from the government of Kerala to compute the sustainability of the debt caused by the pensioners.
I think the panelists can now respond, and once they respond, we can take a couple of questions later, possibly.
The presentation, you mentioned that lack of visionless policies are the roadblocks in the inclusive growth. My question is whether this is a problem of visionless policies or its execution. And my second question is, we know that intellectual brains are behind the, or central behind the all policies and development programs, and it's essential. And educational psychologists mention that scholarships are the positive reinforcement for put forwarding or encouraging the students to come forward or enter or polish their or develop their skills. It considered as a positive reinforcement, irrespective of the income, caste, etc. So my question is that in this context, can you argue that the ability to pay criterion is applicable for providing scholarship to the students? Thank you.
So my question is to Dr. Santosh Verma. So you mentioned that land distribution reforms of Kerala was fairly done, and at the same time you showed the table which shows highest landlessness in Kerala itself. It seems contradictory. Could you please comment on that? Thank you.
We will go to the panelists to respond. Professor Salim first.
See, already we are running out of time, so I don't want to talk much on this. We can have personal discussions on these aspects. But let me take at least 1 minute to comment a few words about this. With respect to reduction of costs and competitions, you are arguing that competitions naturally will reduce the cost of education. See, if you observe the history of education and the costing of education in the countries in the world, you can observe that this has not been taking place in any country in the world. See, corporates ultimately forming cartels, and they fix the even pricing the education sector itself. So the same is going to happen in the case of the country like India also. Dani, Tata, and all some groups may form a cartel, and ultimately they fix the price of even education. So that is going to be the end result of this. The competition in education never can be promoted. It should be under the strict monitoring and control of the central government or the federal governments. That has been the history of all the countries in the world. Take the case of USA education, and also UK and Japan, etc. That has been continuously done. Now in the case of, for short of time, let us not discuss in detail on discriminatory fees and commoditization. See, I never argue for the commoditization of education. Education should not be treated like a commodity as apple and orange. It should be treated as part of our human capital and cultural capital. But government and policy makers argue education as a commodity. That I never agree with that. And even for that, discrimination. See, if the government argues for commoditization of education, then norms should be there. Some norms should be there by way of discriminating the consumers, paying the richer persons paying more, and the poorer should be given certain concessions. But I never agree to that. Okay, that is my second point. And economic class and social class, that we will discuss later. Here the economic class, the powerful social class and the economic class are intertwined. Both are almost one and the same. They decide and determine everything. Now come to the fourth question, lack of vision. Or see, I argue that from the part of the politicians, directly there is a deliberate lack, maybe deliberate, because of the intervention of corporate bodies, etc. There is a lack of vision from the part of the politicians. Earlier that was not the case. You consider the case of the Nehruvian period and the education policies framed during the period. See, there is a drastic departure from that. So I say that there is a lack of vision from the part of the political leaders. That should not be there. We will argue further on this because you are a student. I can meet you lots and lots of time. We can have discussions. Okay.
And Dr. Naidu?
And just sorry about the sustainability pension, sustainable level of pension in the monarch of Kerala. I want to talk about any such a sustainable index for the pension in the monarch of Kerala. And again, what I argued that, see, among various, out of a total debt, we spend nearly 65% of debt is mainly for meeting our revenue deficits, and which mainly consists of the salary, pension payment, and interest payment. Of course, pension will be one of the components. Okay, if I use such indices available, like the sustainable level of pension in the government of Kerala, inflation, the PDT, etc., that I think there. That is with regard to Danila's story. Then again, there is one story with regard to the fixation of our fiscal deficit to 3%. This 3% fiscal deficit was initially suggested by our Public Finance Commission. Actually, it is based on the absorptive capacity of the economy. One of the important indicators of absorptive capacity of the economy is the GDP. Of course, there may be variation of though the fiscal deficit GDP is 3%, the absolute amount may vary from state to state depending upon the GDP produced. Suppose a rich state, definitely the absolute value of absolute amount of fiscal deficit can be higher than the poor states. But anyway, here maintaining this type of a target would actually strengthen the fiscal prudence of any state. And as a member of Public Review Committee, what I found that by spending public money, we are not concerned about the prudence in expenditure, or the fiscal management is very poor. Suppose if you are 100 rupees as a private money, definitely we will use it more efficiently. So here, the fixing the target is at least for maintaining a discipline in our fiscal management. Then for controlling fiscal deficits, say, I never suggested to reduce public expenditure. Rather than reducing public expenditure, we have to rationalize the allocation of public expenditure and also improve the utilization of public expenditure. While examining public expenditure of Kerala, what I found that the public expenditure is, for spending of public money is not at all efficient in Kerala. So, some of the comments.
Dr. Vinoj?
I did not get any questions, so I don't have to respond to me. But there's one written comment as I got about mismatch between workers' productivity and his wages, and it forced to be used Marxist view on surplus value. Yeah, it's very true. I mean, it looks like it is the old Marxian kind of a thing that is coming back, where large extraction of the surplus by the capitalist from the workers. One of the finer things probably that was not present at that time, and which has become much more important, is the speculative capital, and that is something that we have not given much emphasis on in the earlier parts of the analysis about profit versus wages. And it was always thought that the surplus value that would be generated, when you're thinking of in terms of surplus value, we always think in terms of profits and then the wages story. But increasingly, it is the speculative part of capital, the speculative capital, and that's becoming much more important, and much more than profit. It is the speculative element in capital that is becoming much more important. And in that sense, we have actually moved out from the traditional Marxian form of analysis. In terms of yes, profits, in terms of generating more profits, which is what I had showed in terms of increasing capital intensity and changing flexibility within the types of workers and hours of work and stuff like that. But in terms of returns to capital, that's a different story that I have not touched to. But I had just kind of thrown some light of it in terms of looking at the way in which profit and interest was moving. The share of profits declining with share of interest declining with share of profits increasing. So there is a relationship between share of interest and share of profit, which is not very closely looked at. I think that's an important story to look at, and in the overall context of declining wage share. Yes.
So what about the algorithm replace human labor?
Yeah, I mean there is increasing evidence that I had shown that capital intensity is increasing. Capital would mean that it is machinery that is replacing human labor, and also I have shown that in terms of technology, information technology, I had used technology, that is IT as amount of money that is spent on information technology in the total capital, and it shows that significantly it shows that when the IT capital increases, the composition of capital changes, then the wage share declines. That's what it shows. So essentially the story is the same. It's the same line of argument that we are all making. But it's only that I have to want to highlight the speculative part of capital also is becoming an important part of this.
Please explain on speculative capital.
The share market. You are investing in the share market.
Dr. Santosh.
Okay, on Subin's question. Yes, of course, I must have included that, but my the intention was not to compare like 2003 or 2013 with data. That's why I included that. And on land to the tiller, basically what we used to have in the process of land reform, that the tillers, the actual tillers who are doing agriculture, they have no land. That's why we used to demand for land reform. And the land must go to actual tiller. Like there are absentee landlordism, and someone is not in the village, but they are the owners of the land. That's why we used to like say that the land must go from A to B, because they are the people who are cultivating the land. Okay. And your question on Kerala, why there is a contradiction? Like when I showed the methodology, that was what NSSO does, takes land from 1 to 98, the column 1 to column 98, or row 1 to 98. So what they do, they exclude and include homestead also in the process of calculating landless households or not landless households. What in Kerala, in the land reform process, at least homestead land was provided to households. Okay, and when we exclude this homestead from landlessness, we find the proportion increases, and not something like if you have your house somewhere and you have a small part of land where you are growing flowers, or just like in Kerala, you do coconut cultivation or some spices. Okay, they will calculate you like you have land, but in when you exclude homestead land, then you will find the proportion is increasing. That's only the point.
So, but in NSSO report also, it shows almost 10%.
Yeah, 10%.
It's the highest comparing to other states.
Yeah.
Then, but in the initial stage, land reforms were active in Kerala.
Yeah.
And the report shows the contradictory.
Yeah, of course, there may be, because when you go at the lower levels, like in SCs and STs, there is also problem in Kerala. The land is not provided to when you go to an SC community and ST community. That is the problem.
Thank you all the panelists. We know that many more things remain to be discussed, but then another session is coming up, so we may have to wind up. So we may so declare that the session is over. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
To propose the vote of thanks, may I invite Pooja.
Good morning, everyone. I have been given the opportunity to propose a vote of thanks for the technical session that dealt with the issue of political economy problems. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Cyriac Mathews for presiding over the session. Secondly, our dear Professor Abdul Salim for filling in for Dr. ICRIER at the last moment. Thank you, sir. Also, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to all the presenters who have enlightened us on the topic of various arenas of political economy questions. Dr. Nagarajan Naidu, Dr. Vinoj Abraham, Dr. Santosh Verma, and Ranjana Roy. And last but not the least, all the audience who have been active participants. Thank you all.